Right, as you can see from these two scripts, quite a lot of detail has gone into both, and I've analysed both of them as well. But as I will discuss, there are clear differences in how professional they were published, and a lot of improvement went into the later script for the main task, which was the news bulletin, compared to the preliminary task of the interviewing the comedian. Quite a lot was learnt in such a small space of time. So if we start with the latter script, which is the main news bulletin, you can see from the introduction that all the professional elements have been included. So here we have the appropriate mode of address, which is needed, you know, it's professional and very formal, saying good morning rather than hello or hiya. And then a professional approach is continued with stating the presenter's name, Marissa Beaumont. So that gives, in my opinion, a personal feel about a news broadcast. Rather than a computer saying it, it's actually a real person that people can relate to. This then carries on with a station identification, so it shows Oldham Community Radio, so people know instantly what they're listening to, rather than thinking, you know, which news programme is this? And then further idea of how to tune into it. And then there's a time check, which is very important because it states to people, you know, whether they have time to get ready for things, and it just reminds people, you know, what time it is and this is what they're expecting. And then we start with a very clear and concise view of each of the three stories that will be included further into the bulletin. So as will be expected, this starts with the hard news story here. So the Prime Minister, Mr Cameron, that one. But it's only a very concise little snippet of what is to come. This coincides with the soft news story, and lastly the off the wall story. So each story definitely contains the 3C rule, so it's concise, correct and clear. So it's short, but it's equally important to be correct, it's not lies. So then, obviously, the first story is the hard story. This usually comes from the order of importance. This is a story what generally affects everybody, all the audience, regardless of who they are, what they are. This is something what could affect, in theory, everyone's life. So it starts with a professional, you know, person, a Prime Minister. So this instantly gives that idea of importance to the listener. If it's about the Prime Minister, then it must be something what is relatively important. Furthermore, this keeps to the 5W and 1H rule, and therefore coincides with the inverted triangle. This means that the top detail, the most important aspects, are included at the top of the bulletin. This is to give more interest to the audience, because if they hear the main details first, then they are more inclined to continue listening and find out, you know, what it is about. So this usually starts with the who and the what at the beginning of a news bulletin, and then the whys come later on, the reasons why something has happened. And as you can see, this is the case with this hard news story. The who is immediately mentioned, so David Cameron, so the Prime Minister, very important person. The what then comes after. It could be the how, but mainly the what. So this is the cutting benefits, that is what's, you know, what the story is about. The when is sometimes included this early, and it's sort of mentioned by the word suggested, which gives an idea of it was, you know, mentioned. There isn't really a specific time element. However, the whys and further whos come later. So he's doing this to create a land of opportunity. That's why he's reducing the benefits. So all in all, this inverted triangle and 5W rule is definitely included. The 3Cs are still present, as is stated here. The information is very concise, it's only the predominant detail that is included. Finer detail will be later on in the story, or mainly in a newspaper report. Furthermore, an interview with a local MP, Michael Meacher, has been included. This gives local relevance to the story. Oldham Community Radio clearly aims its products at the local people, at the people of Oldham. So therefore, if an Oldham MP is actually talking about Mr Cameron's proposal, then people will be more, have more interest because they can relate to someone and hear how the cutting benefits could relate to the town of Oldham. So in the interview, Michael Meacher does discuss this. And he's also quite an important person as well, so that gives further assistance. Next up, we have the soft story, as will be expected, the second most important in theory. Now, this one also relates to the town of Oldham, it's actually the first word, and the 5W rule is still present, the who's here, the whys and hows are later on. So what's going to happen, the cinema-led leisure complex. So it's very similar to the hard story. I mean, the 3 C's are still present. It is still very concise, only the main details are included. Read the Oldham Chronicle if you want the finer details. And then an interview with a councillor, similar to the Michael Meacher example. He's giving professional insight onto what is happening with the cinema. He has more of an idea than anyone else, really. Lastly, we have the off the wall story. Now, this is a story that is always slightly quirky and not quite as important as the other two. For this example, it is actually a cake contest, which immediately shows that it's not quite as relevant as, cutting benefits or a cinema proposal. So for this one, it's very more concise, less time is spent on it because it hasn't really got as much importance. Nevertheless, it is still included, and for this one, the interviews have taken place with Oldham citizens, so members of the public, rather than a politician or a councillor, as was the case in the preceding bulletins. So this gives local relevance to the audience because they can relate to these local people. They are usual, normal citizens rather than people in power. So they, in theory, have more of an idea than, the counterparts in Parliament. Nevertheless, the bulletin signs off in a very professional manner. Thanks for listening, a very formal and pleasant sign off, and then it states what is coming up next. So Daniel is up next, so that keeps the viewers potentially, if they are interested in what's coming up next, then they will be more inclined to stick around and listen rather than the sign off just saying bye for now, that sort of thing. And then it states when it will be back, so it's clear that this bulletin is specifically, it's on at frequent intervals, but if people want to hear what's in the news later on, then they know when to tune in. And then a polite conclusion, so goodbye, but a very formal approach. Right, so that is the news bulletin, the stronger script of the two done. Next up is the preliminary script for the comedian, which, as I'll discuss, is not quite up to such a professional and expected standard. The preliminary example starts with the jingle, rather than it being included in, rather than the detail being included coinciding with the jingle. It is separate, and then the presenter comes in with a less formal approach and good morning, and more of a chatty one, hello. The lexis of this is not quite as as professional and formal as would be expected, although this is slightly understandable because this is an interview with a comedian rather than an actual news bulletin. So it goes on to give a further introduction, the station identification, as is the case in the main bulletin, and a time check. And then still the presenter's name is stated and what is going to happen. So actually the sign in, it is the appropriate mode of address, and it is substantially similar to the news bulletin. However, later on, we can say, the comedian then says, "Thanks Daniel, it's great to be here." Now this seems a minimal and lacklustre response, you know, rather than going into detail, just "great to be here" isn't really relevant. Although it is what the presenter asked, it isn't really an elaboration. But this also comes into the time element. There was only around a minute allowed for the whole interview. So that leads to less detail being included compared to the 5-minute news bulletin. And then the presenter gives detail to, you know, what the comedian has been up to, but it seems very informal. You know, heard you've just been on your brand new caravan tour. Less of a radio, you know, interview, more of a chatty magazine article, I would suspect. And then the comedian says, similar to what we said up here, you know, minimal response, "Yeah, it was great." You know, it isn't very much of an expansion, is it? It doesn't really discuss what the caravan tour was about. So how did you become a comedian, the presenter asks. So this is a better approach, really. It's a leading question. It should give a greater response. However, the comedian, you know, responds in expected manner, but I think more detail would have been included. Well, it should have been included. She says, "I used to be really shy, but, you know, how did she change? That isn't really discussed. And had my boring company to run. You know, what was the company? There's no detail about that." Then she said she wanted to change her life and make people laugh, but it ain't as easy as just going out of a company to become a comedian. You know, the actual way in which this were done is not really discussed. The presenter then changes the subject by just saying, you know, thanks Tricia, let's see you in action with the archive clip. So he seems relatively uninterested, so he isn't really taking in what she's saying. He's just doing his job, you know, rather than really going out of his way to understand what she's